Hello everyone, Alyssa Reynolds here for another wonderful Saturday Live. So today is the start of something a little bit new that I've been talking about for a while. I'm wearing my storyteller hat today. So just while I wait for a few of you to start popping on, I'm also going to put up a little note over in my private group, the Amethyst Cave, which I know some of you are already in. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm doing with today. So, like I said, some of you may recall from past lives that I've done that I've been meaning for a while to delve into this other passion. Rather than just talking about it and writing about it, I wanted to start sharing about it, and that's sharing not only stories and poetry that I write, but also delving into stories that come from our collective unconsciousness, which we know as myths, legends, fables, folktales, those sorts of things, and what we can learn from those stories, what we're meant to be learning from those stories. Hi Lilia, wonderful to see you in here today. Haven't seen you for a while actually. Happy you can make it. So, why exactly am I wanting to do this? Well, I actually spent a live a couple of weeks ago talking all about why I love stories and why storytelling is something that I personally believe is absolutely vital to not only our day-to-day lives, but our own spiritual growth, our own creative growth, everything in terms of how we're growing and moving forward always comes back to stories. So I go into more detail about that in that other live, which you can find over on my YouTube channel, Alyssa Reynolds, labeled as Mythic Imagination, if you're curious just about all these reasons why. Today I wanted to spend more time actually delving into stories and sharing some of those stories. So one other thing I wanted to mention as well is expect my usual Saturday lives to start alternating between my various hats of interest and skill. So I'm going to be having more of these lives that will be full of me sharing both some of my own work as well as different myths, legends, folktales and whatnot, in addition to all the channeling that I do as well. So that's going to start alternating a little bit. The same will be happening with the courses that I offer. Speaking of courses that I'm offering, I have one coming up in June. Well, it starts May 31st, goes till June 14th, and it's a beginner mediumship course called Channeling Spirit for Beginners. Be happening for 2 weeks for 125 USD, and it's a wonderful, wonderful combination of pre-recorded videos and live sessions and a lot of practice, both with us mediums as well as with students in a private Facebook group. So it's this great combination that I know everybody has a lot more time at the moment, but even if you didn't have a lot of time, you can be doing this at your own pace, be getting involved as much or as little as you wish to, and by the end of it we'll be sending out all of the material that was covered, be it any of the video or live material or our ebook. so that you can keep going through it even after the course has ended. And we also are connected with a couple other groups on Facebook that are designed for students of mediumship courses to continue practicing in very safe spaces as well. And one of our mediums that'll be involved in it, Jean Healy Power, will also be offering a healing for students at the end of the 2-week course as well. So that's one of my courses that is coming up very, very soon here, and you can register for it by popping over to my website, arreynolds.com. And I will absolutely be having more courses coming up in the future that will be designed around all this storytelling that I am starting to share a lot more. So keep your ear out for that. So to set the space and set the mood, one thing that I personally do every single day that I'm sure some of you are very familiar with, as you probably do it yourself, is I like to pull a card from one of my many oracle or tarot decks, just to get a sense of what's my focus going to be today, what's the energy going to be today, and help kind of center my tendency to be all over the place with a lot of my projects and creativity. So for this live today and for all of you, I pulled a card, and it is wonderful for this particular time that we're going through. So just holding it up close enough for you to be able to see the beautiful image. It's from one of my favorite decks, Shadowscapes Tarot. Beautiful, beautiful artwork, and it is the Page of Wands. And this is all about beginnings, particularly brand new beginnings, about starting out on some sort of fresh path. And it's about grabbing onto these new opportunities, these new chances, and just exploring them for the sake of experimentation and curiosity, of just testing things out and not having any particular final product in mind or final destination in mind. Just saying, okay, I have this idea, I'm feeling pulled in this direction, I'm curious about this, I am just going to follow this path until I am bored of it, or until I'm not feeling pulled toward it anymore, or until it happens to maybe become a particular product. So maybe out of it you find yourself painting a whole picture, or you discover that your passion for dancing to some favorite music has now connected you with people who are love that same passion, or you find yourself getting back in touch with things that you used to do, like gardening or writing or singing, whatever it is that allows you to express yourself, whatever it is that allows you to connect with yourself, connect with your higher self, to connect with the earth, to connect with spirit in general. That's what this time is really all about. Just go out there and what I just had dropped into my mind is one of my favorite childhood mentors in terms of like fictional storybook type mentors, and that's Miss Frizzle from the book series and the TV series Magic School Bus. And she always has this phrase about, don't be afraid, just go get messy. Get messy. So that's something that's this time is all about. Don't be afraid, don't worry, just go out there, get messy, and explore and try things. Hi Ursula, wonderful to see you, wonderful that you were able to make it for this somewhat unique live, as I've been saying. So, speaking of this being a bit of a unique live and another thread on top of my lives where I'm exclusively just channeling, I always value all of your thoughts, your questions, your opinions. You guys are so high vibrational and so wonderful and are what keep me coming on every single Saturday, despite the fact that I'm an absolute introvert. So whatever thoughts, questions, curiosities, opinions you have, put them out here. I love hearing them. If you ever wish to send me a direct message with a particular thought, question, or opinion, you're also welcome to do that. And for those of you who aren't in my group, the Amethyst Cave, yet, that's also a very safe space for you to be able to express any of those thoughts or opinions or questions. It's where I hold a lot of my channelings, specifically for just the people in the group, so that I can really connect with them and the questions that they have about anything that's going on in their life. So pop over there if you haven't. And this leads me into the main part of what I wanted to share today, and that is a few of the poems out of the book of poetry that I've been sitting on for almost a year, and I'm hoping to finally get it published before summer hits. So speaking of just diving forward, doing something and not being afraid about getting messy, this is my thing right now. It's just getting all these poems off of the file that they've been sitting on for too long and just going out and just doing it and putting it out there and getting it done. And in addition to just sharing a few of the poems from the book, I also wanted to share what is probably my favorite myth. And I say probably because it's really hard for me to pick like myths and order them in some sort of list because I'm the sort of person that loves everything for different reasons, and it doesn't really exclude one as better or worse than the others, and I don't even like using that word. And so anyway, I wanted to share it as a start for this whole series in delving into stories that have grown from our human collective unconsciousness and exploring why they've come out of our collective unconsciousness and what we can still today be learning from them. But I will get to that. So, the poetry that I have put together into this book was developed over a period of about a year, where, again, I did that thing where I was like, okay, I'm going to stop hiding in a corner and I'm going to start challenging myself to write one poem every single day. And I managed it for a year. Got a poem every single day. There were a few days in there where I even managed two. And if you're curious, you can see a lot of the original snippets and bits and pieces of the small versions that I wrote of some of the poems that are now in this book over on one of my older Instagrams, at arreynolds. That's my website, at arreynolds. There we go. That's my Instagram handle, where I did all of that poetry for about a year. And all of these poems, interestingly, as I started looking back through them over the year, I started seeing a lot of themes in them. Themes of nature, themes of myth, themes of stories, themes of magic, themes of all those mysteries about the universe, about spirit. And that has then been brought down to a book of around 100 and so poems, titled Invocations to Horizons. And how all these poems came about is why, when I talk about my poetry, when I talk about my writing, when I talk about my music, I always say it's not just poetry, it's not just my writing, it's not just my music, it's that and spirit. Because for me, the act of creation is not just coming from me. It's not just coming from a surface level of the 3D reality. It's looking at the 3D reality and then tapping into the deeper threads, whether it is me specifically channeling a particular being, or if it's me just sitting in a forest and I'm drawing on the energies around me to influence the phrases, or I am tuning into my higher self, or I'm sitting around other people in a cafe and tuning into what is their energy in this moment and how is that influencing me, or I'm tuning into language itself and meditating upon a particular word, a particular phrase, and what are the images, what's the emotions that are connected with these different words, because language is how we communicate in the 3D reality. However, it is also intrinsically connected with spirit, with our perceptions of what is beyond what we literally perceive and how we perceive it. And then, of course, language changes over, our timeline. And that too is connected with what were the different vibrational frequencies like throughout those different times. Anyway, I could keep talking about how the whole act of writing poetry comes about, probably for a whole live unto itself. But hopefully that answers your question a little bit, Ursula. Yeah, that there is absolutely an element of channeling that does come into my poetry, and my sources are, as I've said, kind of all over the place in terms of who I connect with. Ooh. Good question, actually, Ursula. How times do we need to get messy to have fun? Yeah, that's something that I've asked myself so many times. Again, speaking as someone who is constantly exploring and creating, and even spent 2 years traveling, because I was like, okay, my mental explorations aren't going anywhere. I'm gonna physically make myself travel. I'm gonna physically throw myself into very, very different situations to make myself very literally messy. like the time I got stuck on a sheep field on the Isle of Skye overnight, and the weather wasn't particularly good because I totally misjudged time and got lost trying to find a fairy circle. And that was just one of those times. So yeah, I've just come to accept that life is about being messy and just exploring that mess and seeing where it goes and having fun with being messy and not beating ourselves up over that either, which is another thing that I'm still working on myself, is letting go of that need to be perfect. And that too is why I'm doing this today and have this book of poetry that I'm now going to put out, because it's my expression of, okay, this has been created and I'm not going to hold on to it until it gets to some sort of unknown perfected point, because perfection can keep going on and on and on and on and never necessarily finish. Speaking of that, I'm also starting up a new YouTube channel, The Inn of Stormy Nights, where I'm writing little short episodes of stories within the period of just a couple hours, recording them and then putting them up. So really doing almost no editing at all, as a bit of a personal practice of just tapping into what story is needing to be told, what is the language that needs to be told, and putting it out there without doing any editing from my ego brain, because that's what the editing is all about. The editing is our ego then saying, ooh, that's not quite perfect, that's not in the right spot, I don't like that word, maybe I should delete that word, maybe delete that word, which is another thing about my poetry, that a lot of people do spend a long time fiddling with the words and the order and the structure. And again, because I was challenging myself just to write one poem every single day, I got into a rhythm where I was just tapping into whatever energy I was tapping into and let the words just flow. So yeah, really basically like how you would do channeling, except instead of speaking it, I was writing it out. So on to actually sharing a few of those poems. Aw, yeah, sorry, I was laughing there a little bit just seeing that comment, Ursula, of yours, that yes, that whole moment of me getting lost on the Isle of Skye and then having to sleep on a sheep field overnight was absolutely the fairies messing with my sense of time and direction, which they do 90% of the time anyway. Like, I always get lost because of the fairies. And anyway, yeah, they did that because it was an experience I needed to have, that, hey, you can get lost and stranded in the middle of nowhere and yet you're still okay. Everything's okay. And it was actually a really rather magical evening and morning. Yeah, the whole editing thing, that's a big part of just letting go of the perfection. And yeah, anyway, I can also talk about editing and how it's important not to edit and just go from what's in your heart on a whole other live another day. So the poems that I wanted to share today, like the whole collection, deal with themes from nature. They deal with cycles about nature. They deal with the high points, they deal with the low points, they deal with those bright points, they deal with the shadowy points, all those different sides and things about life that makes life rather messy. And is also something that, as I've heard from Spirit so many times, is not binary. There is no either or, there is no good and bad, or best and worst. It's all on this spectrum that is needed to not only create balance, but to also allow us, who have chosen to incarnate here in this time and through however many lifetimes we've chosen to incarnate here too, to learn and grow. And you can't have learning and growth without facing up some of those sticky, messy bits, as we all know. So the first poem that I wanted to share is a poem that I chose because it's about openings and beginnings as well as about endings and things that have passed. It arose from an image that came to mind one day when I was just walking along the beach of two people on opposite ends of, I was walking along like this bay area, and there's 2 points that stretch out. One of them's over where there's a lighthouse, and the other one has quite a bit of forest. And there were 2 people that I saw just standing on either end, just in my mind's eye. And it was not literally just on either ends of these 2 points in the bay, but on different ends of the universe, on like different dimensions, different times, and yet they were still able to touch. And in my mind, then I heard singing of lines out of one of my favorite poems, which again is really hard to define things as favorite, but this particular one is up there, and it's an Old English poem called The Wanderer that comes from, again, from the Old English oral tradition, but what we have today is something that was written down by one of the Christian monks in the medieval period. And this particular poem, The Wanderer, delves into this concept of ubi sunt, which is a Latin phrase meaning where are. And it's also a oral storytelling device in the Old English tradition that deals heavily with themes of reflection and recognition of change and letting go of things that were, and as we move into a future and old ways of doing things are let go of or lost. And it really came out of also that particular time period where there was a lot of invasion happening with a lot of different individuals, particularly on the British Isles, and a lot of language getting kind of mixed up, a lot of culture getting mixed up, and that's where this particular theme came into a lot of the oral poems from that time, was recognizing that these old ways of doing things and being and belief and thought were being kind of swept out for new ways of thinking and being. So anyway, that's a little bit of that poem, and if you're curious about it, J.R.R. Tolkien actually used a few lines from that poem and adapted them a little bit for this speech that King Theoden has in The Two Towers, right before the whole Helm's Deep battle, where he talks about where is the horse and the rider, where is the horn that was blowing, and he's also kind of reflecting on things that have to kind of this turning point. And also in this poem, speaking of things that I've already been talking about a little bit, I reference Plato's cave, which is this philosophical visioning of our 3D perception of reality being actually quite limited, because we're here all sitting in this cave seeing shadows on the wall and thinking that those shadows are reality, when really they're reflections of the light of the fire that is behind us and beyond us. And if we step out of the cave, then we can see, oh, those are just shadows. So this one had quite a few different elements that just grew up together when I had that particular vision come to mind. So it's titled Join Me. Singing songs of Ubi Sant, he wove his love of her through pond ripples growing into blossoms, harmonizing the heart of his eyes. His voice built caves filled with sorcerous ties. When moonlight severed his thread, his mind formed fractals, ice sculptures inside the homes of barrow whites. She smiled and sang counterpoint, wove honey into his shadows and sunlight to hue his ice into oceans. She wore his blossoms in her hair. He ran, kicking up dandelions, the clouds growing under her feet, chasing a sky still wearing luminescent perfume fireflies formed from sparks he'd made in play with badgers and fox friends. Twirling swallows with branches caught between his fingers, until he surrounded the world with cedar, searching for her, leaving notes for her. She gathered his dandelions, spinning them, to make stars shine light through every cloud. She took his cedar and carved a canoe, riding rainbows and sunsets as she read his love. He sought inside the thunderstorms to collect thunder for drums, and he danced for her. He danced footsteps upon the walls of Plato's cave, deep in spaces rising inside black mountains. Here, at last, she met him. I hear you, she said. I see you, she said. Let us dance. So, for my next poem, it's a lot lighter. It came out of me chatting with the fairies one day. And they were encouraging me to go back home and to connect with the little dwarf birch tree, where as a child I had spent a lot of time connecting with the fairies there and building little fairy houses and taking all these bits and pieces, whether they were rocks and twigs and petunia petals and fabric or plastic farm animals or bits of string and sparkles or whatever, and just putting them all together into these little fairy houses that as I got a little bit older, into like, it was probably 8 or 9 or so, those little fairy houses started becoming these like epic storylines that I'd involve the fairies in, and I'd ask them, where should I take these characters? What should I do with this? And so anyway, this particular poem came out of a conversation with some fairies just about reconnecting with my childhood and my childhood self. And ultimately is one kind of about finding your way back to who you were or what is underneath all of your different layers. And even if you're someone who is wandering around a lot, which is me, it doesn't mean at all that you are directionless or passionateless. In fact, you're just as full of direction and passion as everyone else. It's just you're going in a lot of different spaces and places. So this one is called Your Compass is Made of Stars. Dear scoundrel, wanderer, pirate, you who chases adventure. Okay. Sorry about that, you guys. I had a momentary Skype call from my mum. Speaking of childhood and home. So, your compass is made of stars. Dear scoundrel, wanderer, pirate, you who chases adventure, you who walks galaxies, see those cracks cut into the skin of the universe. They shine memories to hold from port to port. A cat, a coin, a candlestick. You spy them fore and aft. See those fissures in the firmament, those stars, they shine away eldritch, who mean to scare true every childhood fear, feeding the sky with what children wonder hides under the beds. And instead, in turn, the firmament shines brighter. Pinpricks of light that become every childhood dream to shine out the fears and feed the sky instead with nightlights like those long ago when you were still tucked in by a mother's bright kiss. These cracks are stars from galaxies far, who guide us toward windows when doors close, who twinkle songs of home, who pull us out of every hollow in a swirl of nebulous proclivity. They dress the Milky Way as a rocky road where roving feet follow light speed to the next planet, turning ever on, ever on. Not all wayward feet are wicked, my dear scoundrel, my wanderer, my pirate. To you who chases adventure, listen to the stars. They will point to you true. All right. So the next one I wanted to read now goes into something a little bit more serious. It's one of the poems that came when I was sitting in a cafe around lots of different people and just tapping into all the energies from the different people. And what came out of it was the thing that drives me to write stories and tell stories and just share stories, even the stories that I haven't written, the stories that have come from our collective unconsciousness. And that is how so many people go about their day-to-day caught in these patterns, caught in this rhythm that they've just developed over time. And some people are aware of it, some people are not, that they're caught in basically this cycle just repeating over and over and over again of what they're doing every day, and they've lost the magic that they may have had as a child, or whatever age, where they may have been more in tune with themselves and in tune with what is around them, rather than just going about kind of in this blind haze of, I need to wake up in the morning, I need to have breakfast, I need to drive to work, I need to do work, then I need to come home. Like, pulling people out of that is what I've always seen stories is for, and stories are about. And not only just happy stories, stories where things are all good and shining and great, but stories that are full of flawed characters who are challenged and who grow and change because of that. Because that's what stories are for. They're for helping us to out of certain patterns and then find a new pattern to connect into, especially for the people who are not yet as aware as some are. The people who are just starting to have that little tweak in their mind of, okay, there's something more than this pattern that I'm stuck in. And that's what stories are for. They're to teach, to challenge, to question, to like put that little seed in people's mind about, hey, there's something more than just what is in your backyard. There are things beyond your backyard. There are things in your next door neighbor's backyard. There are things in your city, in the wider space that you live in your country, in the whole world, in all the people in the world, and that's stories. And so this particular poem is me really reflecting upon my space as a storyteller in tandem to all these people who I was connecting with that particular day, but also in general, just the state that many people are in and are just beginning to kind of move out of. So this poem's titled Oblivion. Over hill and far away, I have wandered and traversed, collecting stories, leaving legends, records, tokens, and tracks, runes and wishing feathers. Every glitter of olive rock I have broken with my fist has softened with my voice, speaking stories. Each falls like thunderstorms against the windows of night. I tell tales of toils and troubles that some would have us forget. I follow rumor of great glaciers from whence no traveler has returned. I climb peaks and find seas falling up from under the mantle of stars, proving underworlds exist only for one type, those who lock and shut their doors. I enter inns as a priestess enters a temple, a cloak of storms at my back. I pay for food and drink, sweet and savored as my memory of the home where I began. Here my stories delve deep as a bucket down a well. I take my audience with me. Together we wonder if the world lies at the bottom. In these dark spaces, I meet people. We bond over flickering firelight, food and drink. We rise at dawn, mount our horses and keep on. We remain together, even apart. So do not fear the dark, the curving road, the howl of wind, the cowled stranger. All that thought of all that fear holds back all the good, the spirit tales and storied songs which shine under the moon and the sun. What I have seen in all my wonders gives both a seat at the table. Such division you do not see in nature, as mountain flows to forest out to sea. It is only human terror and inner enemy that makes the divide seem real. Over hill and far away, in all my wandering stories, I have learned that great divides come only upon what and who gives space and story instead to ignorance and fear, rather than the sacred circle of light and dark. But I am the keeper of the wheel, the well, as each and every one of us is. and I will not let such dividers leave their scars. I will tell tales at every inn of tall mountains and deep, deep caves. No more will truth be oblivion. Alright. So, now to switch to something a little bit brighter again. The next poem I wrote when I spent about 2 weeks house sitting for my aunt and uncle who live way out in the countryside over on the mainland of British Columbia. And they live on an acreage that is bordered by forest, and this forest is filled with this swamp. So it's essentially a giant swamp forest. And then on the other side are the massive mountains of the valley that they live in. And I spent a lot of time just sitting out on their porch or going out for walks through their fields, or delving into the little wooden walkways that my uncle built quite a few years ago over top of the swamp, so that you can actually go into the forest without getting stuck in that swampy water. So this particular poem came from just one day when I was sitting out at the back of the house on the porch and connected with the mountain, because directly in line behind the house is this huge mountain that goes up in this absolutely perfect peak. And at the time it had still quite a bit of snow along the top as well, because it was still only March at that point. So this one's called In Silent Spaces. Silence, a thick Afghan blanket, settles heavy at first, scratchy too, left idle for countless clock ticks. On tiptoes, it warms the space between bent knees and elbows. I curl into it, settling, settling. Soon, the silence sits too, as natural as the drum of rain on windows and harmony of chimes. Each morning I release my arms to the sky, a form of one world tossed up to connect with all others. Sometimes I spy clouds above the blanket of silence. They turn and turn, an atmospheric mobile around mountains, trees, and me. And then they stop and are frozen still. I go back to that thick Afghan blanket. It settles with a breath, a whoosh and a rush down arms, hands, fingers, and toes. The blanket rolls over into new crescent quarter gibbous. This lunar cycle blazons a return to when clock hands sit always on rush hour. But until then, I settle. I sit with silence. Fingers in pockets, knees and elbows poised in quiet triangle. I sit with the blanket, and silence speaks. Oh my gosh. Every time I read that poem, I just want to curl up and fall asleep a little bit. Alright, so the last poem that I wanted to read for today's bit of poetry reading came from one evening when there was an amber moon, and I was sitting down at the ocean that night, which is a beautiful space to really connect with the moon, because as it goes right up over the ocean, you always get that gorgeous moon path along the water. So I tuned in with the moon, and in that moment it felt so much like home. And so this particular poem is all about just home, coming back to home, and what home is made of for each of us, and how for each of us home is very different, and we have all of our own ways of defining it. I am home. In my embrace glow secrets from home, of millennia fallen to sand and storm. I resound with ample glow within the eye of the goddess. I am fireflies from childhood days. I am the candle upon the sill. I am the lantern call of home, and memory of honeybees and 1,000 lives before. I am shadows of rabbits and unicorns. I am stars across midnight lakes. I am cinnamon tea held between hands, and memory of bonfires and 100 lives before. I am rain sparkling against windows. I am lighthouse beacons through mist. I am tree canopies making a house of woods and secrets in fairy circles, and one life before. I kiss your eyes with electricity. It leaps from cloud to loam. Remember ancient days ago, when we danced upon singing stones, and I hugged your limbs with golden blaze. Amber moon, I am home. All right. So, speaking of home, this is now my segue into the favorite myth that I was talking about way back at the beginning of this live. And it's favorite for many different reasons. It's favorite because it's, as far as I can remember, probably one of the first myths that I had ever heard and had ever connected with. Because I first came across it when I was about 7 years old, and I had gotten this Microsoft game called Pandora's Box, which is such a wonderful game that they've never updated. So I haven't been able to play it for years, because the last time was when we had, I think, Windows 98, I think was the newest version that it was able to work on. So anyway, that was the game that introduced me to the myth of Pandora. And as I've already said, and talked about a little bit, even in the poems I've read, I've always been really drawn to people who are wanderers, explorers, people who are kind of outside of the norm of society, people who are not necessarily totally set on, okay, this is my focused path, and they kind of zigzag through whatever they're doing. And people who are driven by curiosity, people who are always seeking and exploring, and not allowing themselves just to be in one cycle for too long. We all get stuck in cycles. Cycles are all parts of things, but always striving to look beyond that. And that's the heart of Pandora's myth, is just the importance of curiosity in our day-to-day life, which, when I was thinking about what myth I wanted to start with, um, immediately I got pulled over to the CD cover of the game Pandora's Box, which I've got stuck up on my kitchen wall along with a lot of other bits and pieces of inspiration, because that game also was a huge inspiration for a lot of the stuff that I write today, because it had a lot of myths mixed in with Pandora's Box. And anyway, I got drawn to look at it. I was like, yes, that's it. And it made me realize too that that's why I love stories. That's why I do what I do today as a medium, as a teacher, as a creator in general, because I've always wanted to encourage people to be imaginative, to be curious, to ask questions and seek answers, and to create their own answers even as well. So that's a little bit of what led me to starting with this myth today. And one thing I just wanted to preface the myth with before I delve into it is I've often heard people of like all ages, whether I've had like little kids be like, but miss, it's not real, or miss, that's not a very nice like person. And I'm like, well, these myths are not meant to be taken literally. So the myths that do have characters that are not necessarily the nicest, or they're doing things that you look and you're like, oh boy, that's horrible, or that's crazy, or I can't even believe that, or like the idea of, whoa, one of my favorites is the whole story about Athena being birthed from Zeus's head, which sounds crazy and ridiculous and is really just a giant metaphor for the fact that she stands for intelligence, for knowledge, for wisdom, for seeking all of those things. And it's not literal at all. So myths are giant metaphors. They're symbols for things in our collective unconsciousness. So that's another thing I really wanted to mention, because when you do go and explore myths, don't like shut the door on one because something seems a little bit like too scary, for example. It doesn't mean that it's low vibrational. It is a metaphor, it's a symbol for something, and it's not literally meant to be understood in that literal sense of, whoa, somebody's just like been born out of someone else's head. Or one of the characters in this myth having his liver eaten out every single day, goes to explore the symbolism of the liver and what its purpose is and what it means. And that's the myth of Prometheus, which will be another one I'll talk about one day. And in fact, myths, legends, folktales were used to teach. They were used to teach social mores. So yes, you'll come across folk tales especially that do have low vibrational kind of threads to them, particularly the fairy tales that were meant to teach children about how to act in the society that they were growing up in. And that's another part of what I'm doing, where I'm connecting with all these different elementals and exploring, okay, what is their energy actually like? What are their duties and their purposes here on Earth? Because so far, it's all absolutely different from how they're portrayed in fairy tales, for example. But myths tend to be delving into the deeper collective unconsciousness, and are used to teach more spiritual based kind of concepts, or things to do with connecting with the earth and the wider universe. And there's a wonderful book called Hamlet's Mill, for example, that collected about 200 myths all around the world that all explain the movement of the stars, the movement of planets, and all sorts of things about astronomy, essentially. So they were teaching science through myths, which is amazing. So anyway, that's just my little soapbox moment about myths and not taking them literally. So speaking of taking things not literally, the myth of Pandora is ultimately getting us to think about the order that we have in our lives, the systems that we have in our lives, both on our personal level, both on like the family level, on kind of a neighborhood level, on the level of the cities, the countries that we live in, the societies that we live in, and acknowledging those different systems of power and authority and structure, and being respectful of them and how we need to work with them to certain degrees to live within this 3D reality, but then also to not let them stop us, to not let them get us stuck in some sort of circle and cycle, and to push for change, to challenge other people's perspectives, to challenge our own perspectives in how these different systems work and operate. So again, ultimately about that curiosity and going toward places and thinking of things that wider society, wider structures may not be yet ready to go toward or to think about, but to go and challenge those directions anyway, and to stand up for, okay, we're going to go and explore and see what this takes us. So the story begins in ancient Greece, where there were two brothers named Epimetheus and Prometheus. And they'd upset the gods, particularly annoying the most powerful of the gods, Zeus in particular. And for this upset, Zeus wanted to think of a punishment. This upset had to do with Prometheus stealing fire from Olympus for humanity. But that's a whole other story. And so, Zeus's plan to punish the two brothers drew in his other siblings. He asked Hephaestus to help create a woman from clay, and he asked Athena to breathe life into the clay. And he asked Aphrodite to make her very beautiful. And he asked Hermes to teach her how to be both charming, sly, and curious. And Zeus called her Pandora, which means woman with all the gifts, and sent her as a gift to Epimetheus. His brother Prometheus had warned him not to accept any gifts from the gods, but Epimetheus was completely charmed by the woman and thought Pandora was so beautiful that she could never cause any harm, so he agreed to marry her. Zeus was pleased that his trap was working, and so he gave Pandora a wedding gift of a beautiful box, which is actually a jar called a pithys, as a little side note. That's translation. The Greeks did not use boxes, they used jars. And so this jar, or box as it's more commonly been known, had one very, very important condition with it. And that was that Pandora was never supposed to open the box. Of course, Pandora, having curiosity built into her, was extremely curious about the contents. But she promised she would never open it. Of course, this curiosity ate at her and ate at her and ate at her, and she kept thinking, what could be in the box? She couldn't understand why she would be given a box if she wasn't allowed to open it, see what was inside. And so she could think of nothing but unlocking the box and discovering what was its secret. And this, of course, is exactly what Zeus had planned. So finally, Pandora could not stand the unopened box and all its secrets any longer. So when she knew that Epimetheus was out of sight, she crept up to the box, took the key off the high shelf where it had been placed, and turned it in the lock and opened it. In the last moment, she did have a thought that there would be a lot of anger for her opening the box when she wasn't supposed to. But she turned it a little more, turned it a little more, and then finally just turned it all the way. She had to open the box, otherwise she would go completely mad, no matter the consequences. And so the box unlocked, she took a deep breath and slowly opened the lid. And she opened her eyes, looking inside the box, expecting to see fine silks and gowns or gold bracelets, necklaces, or coins even. But there was none of that. And immediately her expression turned from excitement to disappointment and then terror. For Zeus had packed the box full of many terrible things. And out of the box poured disease, poverty, worry, fear, sadness, death. And each of these was shaped like tiny buzzing moths. The creatures buzzed past Pandora, and she slammed the lid shut. Epimetheus came into the room to see why she was crying. And as he comforted her, Pandora wasn't paying attention, for she could hear there was a voice calling to her inside the box, asking, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." But Epimetheus, as he comforted her, said, nothing else should be let out. The box needed to stay closed. But the voice inside the box did not let up, and it kept asking, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." And so Pandora, still with curiosity, despite what she had just experienced, she opened the box. And what was inside was hope. It fluttered from the box like a beautiful butterfly. And shone light around Pandora, through the room, around Epimetheus, and then it flew out the window, following the moths that have just buzzed in fury out. And so, although Pandora had unleashed much of what we all experience from day to day, she also allowed hope to follow. So, this particular story, I know, it's got that little element of, oh my gosh, to it actually falls, interestingly, within the end of what the Greeks called the Silver Age, which then brought the world into the Bronze and Iron Age. So some of you may have heard of the what's it called? The Great Year. The concept of the Great Year, of there being different ages throughout time as we may consider it. And this particular story is coming as the explanation for what brought the Earth from kind of that perfect time period where there was no death and no sickness, no struggle, into the Bronze Iron Age periods of the death, the sickness, the struggle, the stuff that we deal with day to day, and it's just part of life. So this myth is very much an origin story of that particular point on that cycle that the Earth in particular goes through as part of all of the learning and the growth that is needed, that we needed to enter into these this like heavier time period of the Bronze Iron Age to experience those struggles of death, of sickness, of worry, of fear, in order to find ways to rise above it. And that's where hope comes in, of being like Pandora, where even though she opened the box out of curiosity, unleashed all those things, she didn't let fear take over and keep the box shut. She still let herself be guided by her curiosity, and open up the box one more time to then let out that hope, let out that light, that despite all the things that we're experiencing, because those things are here for us to learn and grow and be able to rise into the light, we're holding to that light to pull ourselves back up again. And so that's what has always drawn me to really, really loving this particular myth, is that whole idea of not letting ourselves question our internal feelings too much and just going with them. And even when that internal feeling may take us down a path that then is full of a lot of trouble, to keep going down it, knowing that things will improve, or seeking the light and following that, and then that'll potentially move you off on a path that'll diverge from where you maybe pulled yourself. So I'm speaking really, really generally, and definitely for every individual it's very different. But that overall is what has always made me really, really love that particular myth. And as for the whole concept of Zeus basically setting all of this stuff up, which is a question that I often get from people when I've taught this myth before, is again that Zeus himself is representing the continual movement of a cycle, and that there's greater things at work. There are greater directions and levels and decisions and choices that have been made. For example, we all, before incarnating in this current lifetime or in any of our lifetimes, make contracts stating this is what we wish to come into this life and learn. And so that means that there's certain things that we experience that are fixed, that are part of our life, that have been pre-planned. And in this particular myth, that is what Zeus stands in for. That's his particular position in this whole kind of metaphor about life, is there are certain things that have been preset. And yet, that doesn't mean that things are just going to be totally horrible, because again, with Pandora and having curiosity built into her, yes, that meant she had to experience the horror of, oh my gosh, opening up this box and being like, yikes, what have I just released? It led to her then also finding hope. So if she didn't have that curiosity, she wouldn't have found hope as well and let hope out. So it all comes together and is ultimately about just always rising toward that light no matter what. All right. Yeah, Kirsty, it's very much that light-darkness balance. All right, so to finish off for today, I just wanted to finish with one line from one of my poems from that book that has always really stuck with me. That was one of those lines that came just from walking one rainy day through this beautiful cemetery that I live right nearby, and a lot of the pathways through it are very crooked and kind of cracked, and even though the grounds are really well cared for, the trees are all really well cared for, the pathways are a little bit cracked because the trees in there are very, very old, and all their roots have just made the cement pathways kind of get all cracked up and uneven. And there's also about 10 to 15 deer that permanently live in there at any time throughout the year. So it's an interesting location. And this phrase that came to me when I was walking through there and just connecting with the energy that's in that space is, the roads we walk have abrasions in their skin. The roads we walk have abrasions in their skin. And to me, that line really speaks to the idea that all of us are leaving a mark on the road for others about ourselves, our experiences, our thought, our energy, and no road that we tread has not been tread before by someone else. And so we're never ever alone. Never alone in terms of we're always surrounded by spirit, never alone in terms of we're just always surrounded by the memories of people who have come before, the people who have walked on the same paths. And then the fact that when we have walked a particular path, there'll be many more who will be following in behind you, walking that path that you just walked. Which, to wrap up this whole little journey of today, is a rather comforting thought. So, for those of you who are not already in my group, the Amethyst Cave, come check us out over there. That's where I hold all of my channelings, and I do a lot of other stuff. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Alyssa Reynolds, to keep up to date with these lives that are happening over in the Amethyst Cave as well. They always get posted over to my YouTube channel, or any of these other storytelling based lives that I am going to be continuing to do. And if you would like to read any of my short stories, you can check out my website, arreynolds.com. You can also pop over to my other YouTube channel that I'm just starting up, which is the Inn of Stormy Nights. And if you are interested in any of the courses that are coming up that I'm offering, you can also check out my website again, arreynolds.com, particularly for the beginner mediumship course. So with all of that, thank you everyone for sharing this space, for being a part of this new experiment that I'm going through myself, of being a little bit messy with sharing things that I have created and thoughts about things that have been created by others. And I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next Saturday. So goodbye for now.